Hello, and welcome to the Ramp Up to Retirement podcast with your host, Dan Reese. Dan, good to be with you again. How are you?
I'm doing great. Spring is almost upon us. So, wonderful time of year in Michigan.
It is, yes. The daffodils are starting to pop up above ground here. Promise, the hope of spring is definitely starting to show, which is great and good to see, actually badly needed. You're going to talk about something today that's of similar sorts. It's good to know and it's badly needed. It's not always something that people really want to talk about that much, but I'm sure you get a lot of questions about it, and that has to do with estate planning.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk specifically about just kind of this whole idea of inheritance and really kind of this idea of passing money on, to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some different things that you haven't thought about and some different strategies, but also just the concept in general, because it's interesting. Like, the world's changed. It used to be like my parents, who are 88 years old, they lived in a world where you kind of had a pension, some basic savings, but, really pension, Social Security was your livelihood and retirement. And so the idea of this major estate planning, passing all this stuff on, wasn't as big of a deal. But since that advent of the 401k plans and those types of things, people have definitely socked away a lot more money because they needed to without pensions. But then that also brings upon the idea of, okay, this has got to go to somebody or someplace when they're gone, right? So it brings up a whole nother area to kind of think about and discuss.
Well, one of the things I liked in looking over your notes is that your number one point, or your first point, is a point that I don't think gets stressed nearly enough, and that is the need for communications. Tell us about that, Dan.
Yeah, I think, we've been kind of raised, I don't know about you, but most families, I feel like money wasn't talked about that much. We talk to clients all the time, and it's kind of taboo, right? You don't talk about money. You don't talk about politics, religion, money. Let's just leave that stuff off the table, right?
Money. You can do the money thing after I'm gone.
Yeah. And so, what happens is a lot of times there's this disconnect between, say, let's use the example, the parents and the kids at this point, because, as you live through life, you have all these life lessons. And, part of building wealth is sacrifice and hard work and a lot of choices that you have to make to do that. And unfortunately, we think our kids should just know that, right? They should just, why don't they know it? They know me. They should see how that all went. But Bill, is that the case? Do you think that just happens?
No, no, I don't. No, I don't. And that's why I like it that you want to encourage this act of communication.
Yeah, because really the thing is they don't know what you're thinking. I mean, that's like, they think about like marriage counseling and I haven't ever been through it. And that's probably a good thing, right? But
that's good.
Point is that, let's communicate, let's talk, let's get these things out. Your partner doesn't automatically know what you're thinking or how you're feeling. And so when it comes to this stuff, the very first thing with communicate frequently is this does not have to be we're going to sit down and talk about my history for 3 hours around money and what I think you should do when I'm gone. It's more about, frequent communication, starting out with like values, like, hey, this isn't just money, talk about, how hard you work, talk about like, what it means to you, what you've accumulated throughout your life, and like how you like to see it being used. Charities and philanthropy and doing good with those resources, and, make it clear to those, your next generation, how you feel about that stuff. And then secondly, explain kind of what your thoughts are about passing it on. You don't have to get into exact numbers of how much money you have or different things like that.
Okay.
It's more about like, hey, my thought around this is that, number one, I'd like you to continue some of the philanthropy I've done, some of the giving. I'd like you to really, own it just like you saved it yourself and really cherish it and try to use it for really good things over the rest of your life. Not just go out and buy the brand new, Lamborghini or Corvette or whatever your favorite sports car is with it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that frequent communication, it's kind of taken that idea of bite-sized pieces, and just kind of over time, letting them better understand where you're coming from. So when that day comes, they've got a good idea of what you were feeling and what you're thinking. And even today, there's even some great tools where they'll call them love letters. There's different things that are, designed where you can leave a written kind of ideas or your thoughts to. But I don't think it replaces the regular verbal communication going back and forth, but it can be a really good supplement to those frequent conversations.
Yeah, yeah, and I was raised where nobody talked about money, and there were no discussions about what was going to come or what was happening, and it was just, and nor did I ever expect any. And I remember the first time a financial advisor said, "Yeah, we want to include your kids in the process. We want them to know what's going on. They don't need the specificity of everything, but they need to know where you are and that kind of." And I thought, wow, that is a radical change.
Yeah.
But you raised the issue of charity. Um, it's interesting, the idea that this financial advisor did raise to me in terms of not just communicating the fact that you believed in charitable works, but that if you were fortunate enough, you might want to include your favorite charity or groups in your estate planning, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. It's interesting what you brought up about family meetings. That is such a great thing, right? Because one of the things about and this includes not only money that goes directly to them, but also money that you want to set aside for charity. Because
Hmm.
there's some great tools nowadays to say, hey, let's create our own mini endowment, right? Where we can set aside money, and it's not just a one-time gift when you die. It's like, hey, your kids can continue to kind of manage this annual allocation of gifts to different qualified charities. And, there's things like donor advised funds, and we won't get into specific things like that today. But point is, it's great because when you have that family meeting, you're starting to build like a team and camaraderie. And it's like, hey, we're doing this together versus just parents saying, this is what you need to do when I'm gone, right? Because that's not necessarily a great method. Hopefully you've raised your kids well. They're adults now. They've got some valid ideas and thoughts, and you can bring that all together. And as you do that, you're starting to really tie them into, hey, this isn't just oh, this is a great gift for mom and dad. It's more of like a commitment, to that style of giving and managing those assets for the rest of your life, and then possibly continuing that, right? To your kids into the next generation. So that family meeting, including, philanthropy and charities, is just such a great thing to get everybody on the same page.
No, yeah, that is great. Now, the third point that you talk about is reviewing your plans, which implies to me this is not a static plan. This is a dynamic plan.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is life doesn't stay the same, right? So when you think
Yeah.
of estate planning, and I'm going to kind of put a couple things together here, but like number one, it's a living, breathing document. Like, your idea around charitable giving might change. One of the things that can change dramatically is that a lot of times people, as they get older and they don't spend as much, their estate starts growing a lot faster. So they have more than what they thought they were going to have. And so now that might change their thoughts on how they allocate it, right? Like, it's like, oh my, we've got more things that we need to deal with. You can have new grandchildren that are born, and you might want to begin to incorporate them into your planning. You may find, based on the trajectory of your estate, part of that estate planning may be, we'll talk about some different tools here, but some of them might be annual gifting to some kids or grandkids, where you can give up to like $19,000 a year per person, with no tax filing or anything like that. And if you're a couple, you can actually give double that, right? You could give $38,000, so a husband and wife could give that to their child without any, tax filing for that. And so when we talk about estate planning, sometimes we get into just end of life, right? It's not just the end of life. Like, your estate plan actually should be kind of being implemented as you're living, right? So if that gifting makes sense, that's really kind of part of your estate plan, because really you're transferring money, but maybe you're just doing it a little more proactively ahead of time.
Yeah.
And so, that piece of it goes in, but you just need to stay on top of it, because life is not stagnant. Things change, your estate changes, laws change. So, making sure that you really are visiting that frequently can help make sure that it works the way you want it to.
Now, you mentioned something in your notes about a GRAT, which GRAT. I may not be saying that correctly. I was not familiar with this, and I would love to hear more. What is that, Dan?
Yeah, so it's actually a grantor retained annuity trust. So that's what GRAT stands for. And it's not an annuity like you think of going and buying it from, like an annuity from an insurance company. This is an estate planning tool, like a legal entity, if you will, that an attorney would craft for you. And really it's designed for people that are likely to have estate tax problems. There's certain amount of a size of an estate that you can pass on. Yeah. And that changes every year, right? So like it's when you start having those issues, this is a tool that sometimes can work well. And it's really designed. So if you think of it this way, let's say I'm just going to use a simple example. Let's say you own a business and it's closely held stock. So it's and it's growing rapidly, right? And so you could say, hey, today this is worth $6 million, right? You could put that into that GRAT, if you will, and then what that GRAT has a lifetime, like generally 2 to 10 years, right? And over that amount of time, you get a payment each year out of that, and then at the end of the time frame, it goes to the beneficiaries. The real benefit of it is that as long as it outgrows what's called a hurdle rate, which just gets get into detail, but the government says, hey, there's a certain interest rate that you have to use for this. It becomes a big benefit because in essence, when you put it in, you kind of pay your estate tax, if you will, when you put the money into it. But then the growth, as long as it exceeds that hurdle rate, basically you don't have additional estate tax on. So you've taken that on and you've kind of, eliminate some of that tax. Ooh. And so it's really designed, like I say, for fast growing assets when you have estate tax issues. And so it's really interesting in like I say, closely held businesses. There's different things that I think they've used them for in the past, but if it's not a fast growing asset, it doesn't really make sense because the growth probably isn't going to exceed the hurdle rate, which again is around 5% historically.
Oh, okay. But if you do have a business that suddenly decided to take off, then it is a tool you should sit down and talk with somebody about.
Yeah, and that stuff's super complicated. So just to kind of, like CPAs, attorneys, tax attorneys, you need everybody involved in that, good financial planners, to make sure that, number one, it's appropriate, because anytime you're doing things like that, there's costs involved. There's, you got to make sure the benefits there, that, like I say, the things you're funding it with make sense. Is this asset likely to grow at a pretty fast rate? Yeah. Or maybe to even have an estate tax problem because they continue to, that number gets bigger every year. Now, that could change, right? Estate exemptions can always change.
Always change.
That's why that continual review. But it's one of those things that you would never want to jump into without doing a lot of research involving a lot of experts to make sure it truly is a good fit for your situation.
Is there any other tool that you should, that you think people should maybe consider or talk to their advisor about?
Yeah, one that's really fairly popular is what's called an ILIT. Don't you love these terms?
Like I do. I love these. ILIT. An ILIT.
So an ILIT's an irrevocable life insurance trust. So what that is, and that can serve different purposes, but the idea is that you're removing money out of your estate each year, and you're putting it into this irrevocable trust. So irrevocable means generally non-changeable, right? You can't change it. Revocable trust, which is what most people have in living trusts, you can update them, change them, and everything like that. Irrevocable, typically you can't change. And the benefit of that is when you move assets into that, they typically are outside of your estate. So they don't count them when you die, right? So like that's not counted. Oh, okay. And so what an ILIT is, in essence, is people will use typically the annual gifting limit. So we mentioned that earlier, like $19,000 per person. And you could double that if you're husband and wife or, to a child to $38,000. But what'll happen is that that money will be moved into that ILIT trust, that irrevocable life insurance trust annually. The beneficiary, here's a caveat, the beneficiary of that trust, typically kids, which is the most common, you have to give them 30 days notice where they could actually take that money if they wanted versus letting it stay in the trust. And the reason that's there is so that it can be treated as a completed gift, meaning that you offered it to them, they decided to leave it in that trust, so it's like legally a completed gift. So that's legally outside of your estate. Everything's good there. And then inside of that, it's life insurance is purchased, right? And so you get this multiplier effect where you get this big death benefit for those annual gifts that go into it each year. And then when somebody passes away, that money goes down to your beneficiaries. It's not counted in the estate, so estate taxes aren't an issue. It's protected typically from like creditors and things, because keep in mind, that's a completed gift, so it's outside of your purview, right? It's not yours anymore, the person that gifted it. So like it's protected from creditors and things. So it's kind of a neat little idea, and we've used those with different clients through the years, because number one, a lot of people just like the idea that if everything goes crazy, and maybe markets go bad, or I have long-term care that eats up a bunch of my money, that piece of it was kind of set aside, and that death benefit's going to be there for the kids or grandkids or whoever it is you want to leave it to. Some people, even generally not charities, because charities are already deductible on estate, if you're giving money there, but like for a lot of times kids, grandkids, special needs kids, it could be a lot of different things. But it's a really nice tool that offers a lot of flexibility for many different people.
Yeah, no, that is great, because you hear about you should think about distributing your estate to your kids piece by piece, bit by bit, so that when you get to the final stage, you've avoided as much tax as possible on the estate. And I never heard of an ILIT, which is great, because it's like, okay, I've given you this money, now I've placed it in an irrevocable trust. It's going to continue to grow, and when I pass on, you're getting all that gift plus whatever growth has happened. That's really great.
Yeah. And the ILIT, the one thing I will say, you do need a trustee of the ILIT, right? So like, sometimes you do need to hire a professional, but sometimes people, you might have a family member that could do it, and they just have rules they have to follow. The letters they need to send out to beneficiaries each time money goes in, saying, hey, here's your 30-day window. And if mom and dad are like telling them, hey, don't touch that, Junior, because, the idea is that, you want to leave it. But, so there is a trustee involved. So that's why I always say, like a lot of these things we talk about, you need to really sit down with people that are professionals, attorneys, CPAs, financial planners that can really guide you and make sure it really is a good fit for what you want to do. Because just like anything in life, like the engineering principle, keep it as simple as possible, but what they say, not too simple, or whatever that term is. So
not too simple, no. But I gather, though, implied in all of this too is the issue of timing. It might be good to consider some of these tools, some of these things, earlier as opposed to later.
Yeah, timing, when we talk about timing, really about conversations, like we've mentioned earlier, ongoing conversations are really ideal. Keep it top of mind. Don't make it the only thing you ever talk about to your kids, because they'll drive them crazy. But, do set some time, to make sure that you're consistently letting them know your thoughts on some of this stuff like we talked about. But the other thing is, like you're saying, is how you distribute things, right? So like, we talked about gifting. There's different things you can do along the way. Funding maybe 529s for grandkids that actually helps your kids, right? Because, it helps them deal with the cost of education.
Yep.
Really, and even like, I think with the conversations, explaining your ideas of timing when you die, because I'll give you a simple example. Like we have 3 children, and, 2 in their 20s, 1 that's a teenager. Well, one of the things that my wife and I talked at length about is if something happened to us at the same time and we were gone, the last thing we want is them to get all that money at once, right? Yeah. Because it's just not healthy. That we wouldn't want our whole estate going to them at that age. So when you do good estate planning, part of the timing piece too is how would you want that money to reach them? Like at what ages and for what reasons and things like that. So like that gets into good, estate planning with good trusts and where, so for us, each of our kids have a trust that there's really nothing in yet, but if we passed away, there would be. And then that each trust has its own rules, because we all know our kids can be different too, right? So you might say for one child, hey, we want these rules set up, and then for another, different rules. But the idea is that you can control timing as to how and when people get those benefits. And going back to the conversation, it's good to talk to them about it. And so like, because the thing is, there's already a lot of emotion when somebody passes away, obviously. And so having that opportunity when you're living to explain your thoughts, to explain to them, this is how we've set it up so that you kind of understand it. Maybe even explain to them, hey, you know what? Believe it or not, we actually left Joe, maybe a little bit more money, and this is why, explaining why you did it so that you could say, hey, we've got some concerns about a health condition he has that, we wanted to make sure he had a little extra money.
Yeah.
The reality is you communicate, you tell the kids, and so that they know, then there's not these questions when you're gone and you can't answer them. Right. So.
True. No, that really, really important. And you don't always have to be, I think, Dan, it's fair to say, you don't have to always treat everybody the same, but you do need to be equitable and you need to be fair, as it were,
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should know about or anything that you talk to your clients about in terms of estate planning?
Yeah, I think one thing that people forget about oftentimes is life insurance policies. Because, we get it all the time. Man, my mom bought this for me when I was 5 years old. And, there's a lot of times people have these policies that have been around a long time and maybe not as long, but you need to stay on top of those, because one thing about life insurance policies, and it applies also to things like retirement accounts, anything that can have a beneficiary. Number one, that beneficiary is pretty ironclad. Like, you need to make sure it's correct, because that can create a lot of problems if you have the wrong person. Maybe you went through a divorce, forgot to update the beneficiary. There can be a lot of issues like that. But the other thing is with beneficiaries, I mentioned earlier, my one child, she's only 16, right? Well, she can't really legally get money till she's 18, but if she is listed as a beneficiary, what happens is, once she turns 18, that money's hers, right?
Okay.
So like understanding the beneficiaries on those life policies and understanding how they're structured, so that maybe you need to make trust the beneficiary, right? Where you've got more control with the money, so that the ultimate beneficiary, if they're younger, you can control when they get it, that timing thing, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing too, like we talked about, is, should, the ownership on some of these policies be changed over time based on your overall estate plan? There's a lot that goes into it, but oftentimes people just forget about them. It's kind of like, oh, I forgot I had that, or, oh yeah, that's a couple $100,000 benefit that I didn't really think about, because it's not like a typical asset, because it really isn't. The value's not there till you're gone. So, it can create some challenges. So it's good to remember them.
Yeah, no, it makes sense too. And I would imagine that it's, again, just seems to be common sense. But, when you set up something, when you say, you're 50,
yeah,
you and your spouse or your partner set up something at 50, that estate and everything about it could be radically different by the time you're 65 or 70 or 75, right? You probably, it sounds silly to say it, but I can see how you've done it. I've already got this stuff, got everything planned. And you don't think about what has happened to that estate since you made those plans, right?
Yeah. And I would tell you too, like, if you look at it, it's shocking how many estate plans are written by a really qualified attorney, but never implemented.
Really?
And what I mean by that is there'll be instructions like, you need to change these beneficiaries. You need to move these things into your trust, like yada, yada, all the list of things.
Right.
And if you look at research around it, the most common reason it's not done is because the families don't understand it. They truly don't understand it. And so they're told to do this, but they don't really understand why. And so oftentimes they don't do the implementation, which if you don't implement it, it's worth nothing, right? And so I always highly recommend to people, like, listen, you go through the effort to go in and you pay the money to get this stuff done. If you're unsure at all, I think it usually, if you have a certified financial planner, I think that's a great person to go sit down and talk to about it and kind of get like an explanation of everything. And if you need further clarification, then you can go to the attorney. But oftentimes, once people understand, the huge binder they get and what each piece is, then they're more likely to actually implement it. But furthermore, like you talked about, your life changes. We recommend, if you have a major life change, go see the attorney right away and update it. if you've got a new family member, you've got, a marriage, a divorce, like different things like that.
Yep.
But also like, just in general, every 5 to 6 years, you should go in and just revisit it. And typically, if you stay with the firm that did it, it's going to be a reasonable cost to go do that because they're just going to review it and make sure, oh, you know what, there's a couple things we need to update, but it's not major.
Oh, your son or your daughter got married. There's a kid there's a couple of grandkids that have happened since you did this, got that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons, too, we're a big proponent on, if possible, stick with estate planning attorneys that are part of maybe a little bit bigger firm so that you've got, someone you can go to if they retire or, God forbid, they pass away unexpectedly. They've got your file. They've got someone else that can step in so you're not reinventing the wheel, if you have to make some updates.
Well, Dan, for anybody that's listening to this today and are thinking this conversation is interesting and they may want to continue it with you, what's the best way for them to reach out and set up a conversation?
Yeah, we always say the best thing to do initially is you can always call our office at 517-783-1695. But honestly, go into our website. Like there's an insights tab on top, and it's a great area to learn. There's information around estate planning. There's checklists. You can find like these core areas that we talked about today. There's a document that kind of revisits them if you want to read through it. There's just a ton of great information or all around financial planning, investments, business planning, all these different areas. And I think it's a great place to open up and to begin learning. And then obviously just give us a call or, you can contact us on the website by email and we'll reach back out to you to talk through these things because, our position is we have certified financial planners on staff here that are happy to, take a phone call with you and answer questions. Doesn't mean you have to come in and work with us and have some big relationship. I mean, if it makes sense, we can talk further about a long-term relationship, but we also want you to get good information about these topics.
Yeah. Now, all of this information is in the show notes. But before we leave, just remind everybody, Dan, what the website is again.
Yep. It's just www.Avery Wealth, and that's Avery, kind of like the Avery labels. Everybody remembers growing up. So averywealth.com. And like I say, you could find all kinds of good information out there. We've really tried to design the site to be educational. And matter of fact, all of our podcasts are on there too. So if you click under the tab, I believe it's under the Insights tab as well, you'll see our podcast and you can go back and listen to them right on our website. Or you, of course, can use the typical, podcast platforms that are out there that we all are familiar with. So
that's great. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast who aren't subscribers, well, A, you can go to the website and get caught up. But B, the easiest thing you could do is an immediate one, which is become a subscriber. Just reach out and hit the follow button. The value of that is every time Dan releases a new podcast, you're notified and you can give it a listen. The other thing I would ask is if you like the podcast, tell people about it, share it with folks. Word of mouth promotion is very welcome. It's a great tool and we would very much appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker on behalf of Dan and everybody at Avery Wealth. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. And we'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to Ramp Up Your Retirement. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.averywealth.com or give us a call at 517-783-1695. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Avery Wealth. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. The opinions voiced in Ramp Up to Retirement with Dan Reese are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial, or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on the show may not be affiliated with CWM LLC. Views and comments by guests may not be representative of CWM LLC. Investment advisory services are offered through CWM LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. Carson Partners, a division of CWM LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors.